because we have a couple that we want to go through as like our continued report here about SAMs and about the situation. This is section 5. SAMs constitutes inhumane treatment and may amount to torture. There is a broad and growing consensus that the standard condition of prolonged solitary confinement causes serious and often indelible harm in just after a few weeks. The United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, or the Mandela Rules, named for Nelson Mandela, define prolonged as beyond 15 days, which after continued isolation constitutes cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment, and under the conditions, torture. For prisoners under SAMs, isolation lasts at least a year and typically far longer. A 2003 count showed that 82% of prisoners placed under SAMs while were under the restrictions for more than a year. Of those prisoners, 13 had lived under SAMs for more than a decade. Could you talk a little, Lissa, about what at that range, after 10 years of that intense isolation, just effects beyond what we've already talked about could come about from it?
It's horrendous, utterly horrendous. I mean, you think this after 1 to 2 weeks, you can suffer permanent effects. 10 years, I mean, it's just almost impossible to even conceptualize what that would be like for the person. Well, it is impossible, really, to conceptualize what that would be like for them. Should we recap what SAMS is for people who weren't watching your show last time? That when people are under special administrative measures, that they can't communicate with anybody but some lawyers and family. That's extremely limited. The lawyers and family can't even talk about to each other what they've discussed with the person in SAMS.
Yeah, there's a 2-stage gag order that is issued when you are under special administrative measures, and that is obviously you don't get to communicate with the press whatsoever, but your lawyers don't, anyone who comes to visit you, anyone in your purview is under that gag order as well, to the point to where an FBI agent is appointed to sit in on your visits and can at any moment during an interactive real-time conversation interrupt and censor what you're discussing.
Yeah, and they're very infrequent, aren't they, too, the visits? You get very, very little, and 3 pages of communication, isn't it? A month?
I'm going to pull it up from last week's, at least on my end, so I can have it in front of me.
So people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. But while I'm doing that, if anyone wants to hop in, please do, so it's not just, dead
Do you want to talk a little bit about the actions you had mentioned earlier, Liz, while we get that pulled up?
Sure. I kind of feel like a little bit of a broken record because I always put it in the chat when you guys are on screen. And I've talked about it to other people before, but I really have this amazing vision of just mass, what is it called? Projection bombing or whatever. Like, since we're all under lockdown with coronavirus, if there is any way to do that cheaply, I think it would be amazing to get just even a couple people and create a slideshow, use a lot of the leaked documents, show the story, like maybe do like a 5-minute story of Julian Assange and why it's important to everyone out there, and get megaphones and go out at night and find a apartment building and put it up there and just scream at everybody in the apartment building and just be like, we need everyone to come to the window right now. This is so important. And have it be a really disciplined message where, number 1, this is the story. Number 1, this is why it applies to you. Number 3, these are the actions we need you to take, please. And go to this webpage, go to this vigil. Thank you so much for listening. Peace out. And then, run away before the cops get there. And then just get to the next neighborhood, like maybe half an hour away. Check the laws. I don't want anyone getting arrested, but how amazing would that be if we just had like people all over the country in all countries going out there late at night, like on a nightly basis, and they just couldn't stop us. And we just start bringing in new people all the time into our actions over and over and over again. That's what I want to do. I want to pound them. I'm taking sort of I'm obviously this has been done before over in London and other places. They've already done the projection bombing, but I'd like to take it to a mass scale. And I'd really like to, just have it very focused on bringing more and more people into it, and then using like leaked documents to really prove our points in the quick presentation. And there was something else I was going to say, but I'm blanking out. I'm sorry. But I just want like everyone out on the street, because I know what I was going to say. When I lived in Portland, I'm taking kind of a page from those crazy in quotes animal rights activists who would go out, and they were ballistic. I mean, they would go to like CEOs' houses and get the megaphones out and be like, "Wake up!" And I don't know if we have to be that drastic, but because I don't want people getting arrested. I really don't, and I don't want us to get a reputation for being too crazy. But it would be so amazing, and also videotape everyone doing it, so it would catch on like a little trend. But I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
We've had really good conversations with Patrick Henningsen and a couple other guests about why the hell aren't we door stopping people anymore? Remember 10 years ago when there were thousands of people who had a camera and had a viewpoint who would refuse to give politicians or CEOs or whomever a moment's peace. And that's what we need. If they're not uncomfortable, we're doing our jobs wrong as activists. We've got to drive home that point that no, we're not going to let you get away with torturing this man anymore. We're not going to let you get away with torturing Chelsea Manning anymore, Jeremy Hammond anymore. When we went to DC, and we went to Arlington, Virginia, to the William Truesdale Detention Center that housed Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond, we were as loud and obnoxious as we could possibly be, to the point to where we were underneath an overpass that acted like a tunnel, and there were 30 or 40 of us that were blowing these whistles as loud as we possibly could. I still have ear damage and a little bit of PTSD from that. But I mean, I'm not going to take full credit, that Action for Assange and People's Power Assembly were ultimately what freed Chelsea Manning. But 2 weeks later, Chelsea Manning was out of there. So maybe they don't ever want to hear the whistles anymore, but we'll bring them back. We will. I absolutely agree that finding ways to project onto the side of buildings, things like collateral murder, or things like it's about 3.5 minutes long or 2.5 minutes long, but it was a YouTube video that Greek Emmy posted this morning that details chronologically exactly what happened to Julian Assange, and specifically debunks the rape allegations. And it's excellent. I'm going to contact the person who made it and ask for permission to play it Saturday or next Tuesday. But I mean, these are very necessary steps that we have taken and will continue to take. It's getting a crowd or people all over the world, realistically, to kind of try and coordinate an action, which we've been doing with these virtual marches that have been going on the past couple of weeks. And those have been incredible, and the different kinds of supporters and different kinds of authorities that have been able to weigh in during this. It brings way more legitimacy to it than just simply hanging out on YouTube and screaming about it.
And something too, if there's anyone that's interested in getting involved in any actions, I'll drop the link into the chats again. Each week we're going to be releasing a different group of actions that people can take online right now. And that's just out of respect for the pandemic that's currently underway. If you are someone that would like to take street action, please do so in a responsible and mature manner to not violate anyone's right to not be infected. But this week, we have, I think, 5 or 6 different petitions for people to sign, and also the Twitter handles and local office numbers of all the senators that signed the open letter to Lenin Moreno asking for Julian Assange's asylum to be removed. We ask that you be polite, but we can't control if you are not. But if you could, please message them on Twitter and tag us in it, or use hashtag Action for Assange, or send it to us in a DM, and we'll amplify and retweet it. So if you could, please go onto that website. It's just on Action for Assange. It's week 42 Tuesday actions. Again, I'm going to be planning them out a bit longer. Next week, we'll probably have 6 or 7, and I'll make sure I get them out on social media all week for people too. But the hope is that every week we can pick a new group of senators and organizations that we can target to say, hey, where are you on this issue?
And I'm going to go ahead and I can bring up the overview to bring it back to Sam's. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the overview here on the share screen real quick. Because this is Lissa's right. This is something we do need to reiterate real quick. So very quickly, SAMs can be imposed before, during, or after trial. SAMs prohibit prisoners who live under them from contact or communication with all but a handful of approved individuals, and impose a second gag order on even those few individuals. For example, lawyers, friends, and family may not be able to talk about the case to media or associates. They prohibit defendants, attorneys, and their families from communicating about the SAMs themselves to each other or anyone else. They can also be used to prevent or impede access to family, friends, legal counsel, and prohibit information from external sources, including media, including TV, radio, newspapers, mail, phone calls, and the internet. SAMs can create isolation that is even more extreme than solitary confinement, and essentially render prisoners either physically and or mentally unfit to stand trial. They can be used to enforce draconian conditions like mandatory strip searches for already secure prisoners. They can be imposed for up to a year without requiring review. And that's something that we did. We touched on it a little bit. Elizabeth Voss was on Tuesday and made the salient point that half of these or more Julian Assange is already being subjected to, and including the humiliating multiple strip searches that he had to endure on his way to the courtroom. And again, this is a man who is in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. It's not an insecure facility. And for him to be marched into a room for the sole purpose of being stripped naked and probed is a show of force and nothing else. Well, nothing else outside of completely insane.
Yeah, and that, I mean, and also there were precursors to that in the Ecuadorian embassy. So what we're seeing is a gradual escalation and intensification of these principles and tactics of inhibiting his right to prepare his defense, of the arbitrariness, of the surveillance, of the isolation, rendering him utterly helpless in the face of mortal threat. I mean, that's one of the, one, as well as social isolation, one of the worst things you can do to human beings. And that's another way that persecutors package up the torture so that populations will accept it. You gradually escalate it. That's what we're seeing in Julian Assange's case. It's really sort of classic habituation to atrocity and to human rights abuse. And SAMs will, would be, hopefully that won't happen, but would be the sort of, nth degree, but it's happening in Belmarsh. And for that, I mean, he already has had 10 years of milder versions of that, but if someone was in SAMs for 10 years, they're usually facing a long time in prison, often unsentenced on remand, so innocent, in the eyes of the law, being subjected to this, which would be the case in Julian Assange's case. And this report by the Human Rights and Constitutional Rights Centre said that it's often used coercively, which is another problem with it. It's used when they want people to confess or accept a plea deal or whatever, and then they let them out once they do confess or accept a plea deal. And there's a case in here of a man who was put in there simply because he had some socks and some other personal items of someone who was suspected of being associated with Al-Qaeda, and they kept him there for years until he finally gave them the confession that they wanted, which is what torture does. It just gets people to tell you what you want to hear so that you'll stop. It doesn't get accurate information. So 10 years of that, I mean, you would expect, you know, well before the 10-year point that people can't think straight to engage in their own defense. You know, a lot of people would early on in that start suffering from hallucinations, hearing things, seeing things. A lot of people would become suicidal. People do things to stimulate themselves, and that can be self-harm, just to feel something, just to, you know, just to get out the aggression. Prisoners in social isolation talk about suppressing their feelings too, because if they show too much emotion, then they might, you know, be treated even worse. There might be even more restriction. Also, they're just trying to stop themselves from going crazy, and shoving down emotion is, you know, it's bad. Emotion rebounds. So then people are trying to hold it together, and then, you know, the cork comes off. So 10 years of that, I mean, that's what psychological torture does. It just causes disintegration of a person's identity, their personality, their functioning, so that they're, you know, it would utterly break someone. 10 years, and it's not something that people can psychologically heal from. I mean, that level of abuse over that amount of time, being utterly helpless, abandoned by the world because you're thrown into a black hole. You know, often when people are traumatized, there'll be someone they can find somewhere they can talk to who'll understand. Well, there's no chance of that in Sam. So it's just beyond cruel. You guys were saying barbaric when you were talking about it. It really is. In fact, the UN rapporteur on torture, the previous one, Juan Mendez, said that it's not fitting of a civilized society to have procedures like that in place. I mean, yeah, and I agree with him. I don't think any society that calls itself a democracy or says that it respects human rights can continue to say that when that happens, you know, under their own law, when that's permitted.
You're absolutely right. And to underscore that a little bit, we're gonna pull up another card about the SAMs. So if you could please do that, Sleepy Josh. And this says additional studies demonstrate that solitary confinement also causes severe psychological damage. Symptoms of that damage include anxiety, panic, rage, loss of control, paranoia, and hallucinations. Solitary can drive prisoners to self-mutilation. A 2014 study found that prisoners in solitary confinement in New York City jails were nearly 7 times more likely to harm themselves than those in general population. Rates of suicide among prisoners in solitary are up to 3 times higher than that of general population. These symptoms are widespread among prisoners under solitary confinement. In one study of pathology among solitary prisoners, every symptom of psychological distress measured was present in more than half the prisoners interviewed, and some symptoms were present in nearly all. There is not a single published study of solitary or supermax-like confinement in which non-voluntary confinement lasting for more than 10 days failed to result in negative psychological effects. These findings have prompted a nationwide movement to end solitary confinement, and they moved U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy to declare in 2015 that, quote, research still confirms what the Supreme Court suggested over a century ago. Years on end of near total isolation exact a terrible price, unquote. Liz, if you could chime in and just kind of respond to that and give us your insight, and then we have about 5 or so minutes left with Lissa too. So if I could get Liz, then Lissa, and Lissa, if we could get your final thoughts and where people could find you, that would be excellent.
I apologize. Actually, you know what? I was listening, but let Lissa go first, just because I was on the other page trying to prep my little slideshow, and so yeah, why don't you go first, and then I can follow up, if that's okay. Are you there, Lissa?
Oh yes, sorry. Yes. Well, so my final thought about SAMS is that just the prospect of SAMS being inflicted on Julian Assange in the US by itself is reason to deny the extradition request, because extraditions can't be granted when someone faces cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in the US, and that's on the horizon. So that by itself is a reason that the extradition request should be dropped, which is something that the UN rapporteur has talked about, Nils Melzer. So, and, more urgently right now with COVID in Belmarsh prison, I mean, he needs to survive. He needs to survive his incarceration in Belmarsh. And the doctors for Assange are extremely worried about coronavirus being in Belmarsh, Julian Assange being in there, medically and psychologically vulnerable. So any pressure that can be brought to bear on elected officials, anybody you can write to urge Julian Assange, to be granted, urge authorities to grant him emergency bail in light of coronavirus. That's really important. In terms of finding me, probably New Matilda, newmatilda.com is an Australian independent news website that I write for. So there's a bunch of articles that I've written on Julian Assange there. And I'm on Twitter, although it depends how busy I am whether I tweet or not, but it's at Lissa K. Johnson with a double S. And there's the Doctors for Assange website, Doctors Assange, not Doctors for Assange, just doctorsassange.org. The doctor's letters and so on, and articles and things are on there.